Good morning, everyone. This unit is on oceans, ocean zones, and ocean conditions. You're going to be primarily focusing on the following learning goals. You're going to connect the differences in temperature to the geographic distribution of marine life in the oceans. You're going to identify the different type of organisms that live in the different zones and these different layers of the ocean, and connect the ocean salinity in these different zones to different areas around the world. Now, your essential vocabulary you're going to want to be adding to your Unit 2 essential vocabulary include anaerobic, that's meaning not to be using oxygen, and it's applying to organisms, cells, or tissues, meaning that they do not use oxygen as part of the process of obtaining energy from glucose, as opposed to aerobic respiration. And also, you're going to be identifying their zones of the ocean, the benthic zone. You're going to be looking at the pelagic zone, and also diatoms. Some of the life that you're going to be specifically identifying are the microscopic one-celled one-celled plants that grow in marine and fresh water. They secrete silica in their walls, and they have beautiful forms that accumulate in sediments, and they're called the very important parts of the marine ecosystem, and very aptly called the jewel boxes of the sea. Also, the nekton organisms that swim freely in the ocean. These are all of the types of marine organisms that are free swimming. The pelagic zone, the open water of the ocean, and plankton. Remember, that includes the plants or animals that float or drift in the ocean water. We're going to review that a little bit in greater detail. And then the thermocline, the zones of rapid temperature change between the warm surface waters and the cooler deep waters. And the ocean zones that you're going to be focusing upon, and their more specific vocabulary include the intertidal, the neritic, the oceanic, and the benthic zone. There's some great images that show the intertidal zone from the area of where land meets sea. Generally, it's a zone of high oxygen mixing, and generally organisms that live there are very specific. The neritic zone, and then the oceanic zone, and then lastly the benthic zone. Again, the intertidal quickly is the area between the high tide and the low tide line, and again, the organisms that are here. If you were to visit the rocky shores of California or Oregon, it's a very harsh environment, highly changing environment, and the organisms that live there are very specific. The neritic zone, remember, that's the zone right above the continental shelf, and it's the greatest diversity and density of marine life. If you're a diver, the neritic zone is an area that you would be frequently diving in. And then the oceanic zone, there are coral reefs, right? The oceanic zone from the continental area that breaks out to the open ocean. And then lastly, the benthic zone, that's the ocean floor, and it underlies all the other zones. You're also going to be reviewing the epipelagic, the mesopelagic, bathopelagic, abyssopelagic, and hadopelagic. I'd like you to consider, what do these suffixes mean that will help you do a little bit of investigation and review what does epi, meso, batho, abysso, and hado, what does those prefixes mean? When we get together next week, we'll see how you do. And mesopelagic, as you know, each of these specific zones have specific meter distance, and each has specific sunlight and meters and the amount of marine organisms that are present in each. Again, the three basic life organisms that you're going to be considering are the plankton, the nekton, and the benthos. And they have, the plankton, of course, are the floaters, are very poor swimmers. They're divided into two groups: the phytoplankton, which are the photosynthetic organisms, and the zooplankton, which are the consumers. Their diversity is immense, and the phytoplankton must live in the photobiotic zone because they're photosynthetic organisms. They are most abundant in the shallow coastal areas or the upwelling zones. There's a review word, and they're the basis of all oceanic food webs. The zooplankton are the animal-like organisms and include a variety of different types. Remember, just to review, that the nekton swimmers include the 5 main categories of reptiles, mammals, fish, arthropods, and mollusks. And when you're looking at your lesson, your mastery map, and considering the ecological factors that determine the distribution of life in all of our Earth's oceans, that you're going to be considering their environment of the zone of coastal, ocean bottom, or open ocean, what ecological factors are included, such as latitude and depth, what physiological factors are included, such as temperature, salinity, and depth. And again, lastly, that there's no single factor that determines the distribution of all this variety of marine life. Also, that ocean water oxygen content varies with depth as well. There's difference between the surface, the thermocline, and the deep ocean oxygenated water. And this chart is very, very helpful in helping you understand the differences between those. Again, remember, anaerobic organisms, very low oxygen zone, and the sedimentary layer on the bottom of the ocean would be a rich anaerobic environment. That light is a limiting factor on marine life for the photosynthetic organisms and the animals that depend upon them for their food source. Salinity, as you recall, varies with latitude and depth, and it also has limits on marine life. And while most of the volume of the ocean is fairly uniform and doesn't vary that much, such as most organisms in the ocean, open ocean, are stenohaline and have very low tolerance for changes in salinity. But there's areas, of course, like the ocean margins and coastal regions like estuaries, where you have evaporation, you have influx of fresh water from rivers and streams, that you have a very large change in the salinity content, and these are called eurohaline. They have a very much different tolerance. Of course, temperature varies as well. Your thermocline, as you can see here, we have a sharp drop at about 200 meters, and this is, we call it a seasonal thermocline. And we have a permanent thermocline as well. You can see where there's no change in our oceanic temperatures. Generally, if you're considering this, I'd like you to consider, where do you think in this thermocline most of the marine organisms would be located? Again, temperature varies with latitude, and it places limits on organisms. We know that the temperature of the total volume of the ocean, when you're considering it, doesn't really vary that much. However, the ocean's surface temperatures vary significantly with latitude. Recall that at the equatorial plane, the water is very much more warmer in the tropics and very much colder in the polar regions. So, of course, more organisms live at the lower latitudes, and organisms also vary in their tolerances to temperature. Some can tolerate significant changes, very large changes in temperature, and they're called eurothermic. And they include commercial fish and diatoms and different marine mammals. And then there's others that cannot, and they are called stenothermic, such as corals, have a very low tolerance in temperature. Here's a map that's showing the major distribution of coral reefs around the planet. And another reason why the corals are highly studied by scientists in regards to global warming issues and challenges. All right, everyone. I hope that this review of an introduction to ocean zones and ocean conditions are helpful for you in your studies and understanding of this unit. Remember, on Mondays we have small groups from 10:30 to noon, and then Tuesday through Thursday, 10 through 12, I can be reached by K-mail, instant messenger, and also you can reach me on my office line. Take care and enjoy studying and learning more about our beautiful and hugely and wildly diverse oceans.